Hi, everyone. My name's Chilton. I'm on the faculty at MIT at the business school. Hope you can hear me and see me. I am at MIT today, but I'm not really outside. That's a real picture behind me. So we're kind of in a semi-virtual world. I'm delighted you're here. Thanks for joining. And thanks for the acknowledgement that you can hear me. I'm joined today by two terrific CFOs. The first you can see on your screen here with me, Gina Mastantuono. I hope I said that right, or came close at least.
Perfect.
Thanks, Gina. Good. We're going to be talking with her for about 40 minutes, and then we'll be joined by Steve Schoch. Gina is the CFO of ServiceNow, which is an interesting company at the forefront of all the digitalization that's happening in industry right now around the world. She's been the CFO since January. And we're going to sort of talk in about three parts. She's going to start with her early career and how her thinking has evolved around leadership, and then talk a little bit about the role of the CFO in digitalization. That's sort of the second chunk of time. And then the third part, just about her own observations about what customers are experiencing around digitalization, particularly around workflows and other things that ServiceNow is involved in. Just before we start, you can put, again, your questions into the Q&A. And then you can Google Gina if you're curious about her or her company. But here's what you can't Google, just two quick things. She's the first person in her family to go to college. And she's also a self-described gym rat. So she likes to work out. And maybe she'll have time to talk about that. I don't know, but I think that's probably how she manages some resilience, just because I know her job is demanding. So Gina, over to you. I thought we'd just start, as I mentioned a moment ago, just with sort of your early career. How did you get started? I don't think you set out to be a CFO. Maybe you can comment about that for a little bit.
Sure. Well, thanks, Cord. First, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here with all of you today. But you're exactly right. When I started out in finance, my dream was not to be a CFO. I didn't think it was possible, right? It might sound short-sighted now, but when I graduated university in 1992, there were no female CFO role models out there for me to look at, to even aspire to. And so what I did know was that I wanted to be in business, and I really wanted job security. And the way I saw it, regardless of what's going on in the world, I thought accountants are always needed. So I went to university for accounting. And after graduating from State University of New York at Albany, I headed straight to Ernst & Young. And so my education that I got at Ernst & Young was really instrumental in getting me to where I am now. And I remain a huge proponent of coming up through the big four accounting firms now. They were the big eight at my time. But it's such a great foundational education for all of finance. So I was there for about 6.5 years and loved every minute of it. Since EY, though, I would say, now I would categorize my career trajectory about growth and taking smart risks. And so I'd say my first big real career risk after EY was moving to Revlon in 2007. I felt I was being a bit pigeonholed in accounting for no real other reason of being good at my job. And I think many of you can appreciate when you're good at something, people always want you to stick to it. And so I realized at that point in time that I wanted to do a bit more than accounting. And so I knew at that point I was probably going to have to move away from that role. And I knew I was going to have to leave that company and start something else to pursue my dream. So when I joined Revlon, their stock was at an all-time low, and they were going through a major period of transition and evolution. But I knew going in that it was going to be a meaty role and one that would really stretch me. So, I often say I took a risk on Revlon, but they took a huge risk on me. My journey there was amazing. I started as their international CFO. I was coming from an assistant controller role into international CFO. I had limited experience outside of accounting and even less experience outside of the US. And so if you think about that, it's really where I learned the lesson of taking risks and being more comfortable doing that. I often say that I was also promoted from VP to SVP in a little over a year while I was on maternity leave. So I talk to women about, opting in versus opting out, and you really can continue to push your career even while you're thinking about raising kids and having a family. And so it's not easy, but you can do it, right? And so I love my time at Revlon, and it wasn't an easy decision to leave there, but I had an opportunity with Ingram Micro, which is probably the largest company that you've all never heard a lot about. But it came with a huge opportunity for growth, but a lot of risk as well. I didn't know the industry. It was tech distribution. It was a much bigger business than anything that I had run before, at $42 billion in revenue when I started. And I had to convince my family to move from the East Coast to the West Coast. I had a husband working in sales at the time and two small boys, ages 2 and 5. And so it wasn't a decision we took lightly to move cross country, but that was the role that really taught me about leadership at scale. And so that risk was a big one to take, but one that, once you start taking risks and get used to it, it gets easier and easier. And so fast forward to today, I'm at my dream job at ServiceNow. I just started in January of 2020. And this has probably been the biggest growth opportunity for me. The heart of Silicon Valley, incredibly fast growth company. And they were going through a CEO change at the same time as a CFO change. So tons of opportunity, tons of challenge. But it's truly my dream job because there's such enormous opportunity in front of us right now. And my role as CFO really enables me to have a seat and a voice at the table for all major strategic decisions. So I tell everyone I'm in my dream job, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be in it. But I'll leave you with a final thought. And as I remember back to my early career and how few female CFOs there were, mentorship and allyship is really crucial. And I really feel a responsibility to set an example for new grads and young women. I'm really living proof that it's possible to forge a path to CFO, and it might not be direct. It might have some turns and twists along the road, but there really is a path. You just have to work hard and really want it.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you for doing that. You've had these bigger and bigger jobs, and I think in some ways taken risks and pushed into unknown territory. I'm betting you're one kind of leader today, and that would be different than if we looked at you, if we could somehow magically roll back time and looked at you as a leader 10 years ago, even in a big job. But can you say a few words about sort of how you're thinking about yourself as a leader has evolved, how what you do as a leader might have changed?
Absolutely. When I was earlier in my career, I probably took for granted a bit what great leaders do and didn't really understand it as much. The ability to set a vision, to inspire employees to align behind that vision, and then flawlessly execute it is an ability that I didn't really spend a lot of time thinking about until I really started to rise in the ranks. And it's really true that what made you successful in your early career is not necessarily what's going to make you successful later in your career as you rise the ranks. And as I climbed the ladder, I became more and more aware of the skills that are needed to really inspire people and set these visions. In today's environment, especially, I think we're facing multiple issues all at once: COVID, racial injustice, election politics, the balance between child rearing and elder care while working from home. These are all immediate issues. Yeah, and just so much all at once. And leaders are being challenged in a way that not only have they never experienced, but they never really could have expected. And so, thinking about leadership today and what's really important right now, I think of three things. So I truly believe the superpower for 2020 is empathy, right? I've always believed that it's the soft skills or the skills that can't be automated and easily learned, or what set leaders apart. The ability to listen is just so important right now, more than ever. And I'll be honest, I had to learn empathy. It didn't come naturally to me. And by the way, I think women leaders, people expect that a little bit more. But I'm a hard-charging New Yorker at heart. I hold myself and others accountable to a really high bar and high standard. So empathy didn't come so easily for me at first. So I'm the first to tell you that soft skills can be taught. I focused on this for quite a while because I think it's really one of the most important skills, and it really separates good leaders from great leaders. So empathy is one. Communication is huge. Bill and I often say the most important information to be communicated is very rarely communicated enough. And so communication. We have to communicate often and we have to communicate well. Simplicity in messaging, I think, is really powerful and really key. Interesting enough, I just was I'm doing a ton of reading, as you can imagine right now, about the future of work and what work is going to look like post-pandemic. And by 2025, they say that 75% of the workforce is going to be millennials. And, millennials age 24 to 39, and they've already demonstrated that they will not conform to the norms of before. And one of the key things for them is communication, right? Over communicate. So important. And then finally, for me personally, it's about curiosity and always wanting to learn. I seek feedback wherever I can get it from to really help me just become a better and stronger leader. And so right now, it's definitely different. Leadership today in this environment is very different than, even 5 years ago.
Yeah. Interesting. MIT, we talk about leaders need to have a growth mindset, one that's not fixed. It's like a fixed mindset would be, I'm the CFO. Of course, I'm a great leader. I'm in a leadership role. And clearly you're still curious, still learning, adapting.
I think, and being self-aware is really important, right? Being human and admitting that you don't have all the answers, right? And surrounding yourself with people who think differently and look differently and have diverse thought is super important.
Yeah, cool. I want to switch away a little bit from the personal, though I could talk about the craft of empathy with you all day. It'd be fun, but let's talk a little bit about CFOs and just sort of bring that back to everyone here. And you described all these things that are changing in the world. And you had a long list and it made me just sort of go, stop, it's too much. But in addition to those things, you're talking about the role of the CFO being one of those things. It's also changing. That gear is moving too, particularly because of digitalization, which is the business that you enable, your company enables. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how you see the role of the CFO changing, particularly because of trends to being able to do something like this kind of a meeting and putting digital workflows together. All those kinds of things are changing the nature of what the CFO does.
Oh, completely. Listen, the world has changed pretty dramatically, right? In my time at ServiceNow, I started in January, and 60 days into my new role, COVID hit and everyone went remote. So there's a lot of change happening and companies are really having to operate in new and faster ways than ever before. They have to pivot their business models in some cases, and everyone is adapting to new employee and customer expectations, right? And so it's really about the people, and getting teams to collaborate across the organization is more important now than ever when everyone's home remote. The workplace of the future is going to be more and more distributed, even post-pandemic. I think people are realizing the power of technology more than ever, and managing complex digital workflows is going to be critical. If you think about enterprises needing more innovation than ever, but without disruption, it's clear that speed is becoming the differentiator, and technology really is going to be the enabler. And digitalization is accelerating at a much faster pace than anyone would have expected pre-COVID. And so if you think about what happened at ServiceNow, so at the time, we took more than 10,000 employees completely remote, literally in 24 hours, overnight. And since then, we actually onboarded another 2,500 employees, all remotely. CFOs, as you can imagine, in this environment are really playing a pivotal role of guiding the organization through crisis and really helping make the strategic decisions needed to enable the companies to not only survive the current climate, but also thrive in the next normal. And so I often think about the fact that COVID is really elevating the CFO and others in the C-suite to be chief transformational officers. And they've got to work together. They've got to partner with the business, and they need to understand the technology as well. And so I often talk to, in my role, I'm talking to customers about how they can better understand the ROI on investments and better understand the business outcomes expected. Because as the CFO, not only are you looking to greenlight expense and investment, but you also need to hold the business accountable for really achieving the expected results. And so if you don't understand the basic technology and the concepts, it's going to be much harder to be part of the strategic conversations that are going on right now with the CEOs and the boards. And so I'm a real proponent of understanding the technology. You don't need to be a 10 in terms of technologist. I certainly am not, believe me. My engineers will tell you that for sure. But you do need to be better than a 5, right? So you should be spending some time in that area right now.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about, some people think, oh, digitalization, that's IT's job and not the CFO's job. But you're talking about you're inserting yourself into the situation for a number of reasons. Maybe you could give some examples about what that looks like when that happens.
Yeah. So I was, you could say lucky. At the time, it didn't feel very lucky, but I was brought into, I'm not a technology person at all. In fact, I often say I have like really bad technology juju, right? Everything that can go wrong always does for me personally. But at work, when I was actually at IAC, I was the assistant controller. And back then we were just getting ready for SOX to come through, right? And so there was all this work around systems getting SOX compliant and making sure that we were ready for, the big transition. And so interesting enough, at the time, we were a $6 billion company and we were basically consolidating our books with Excel. And the auditors were like, listen, this is not going to pass SOX compliance, guys. You need to put a new system in place. And it wasn't under my purview at the time, but one of the system integrators came to me, literally knocked on my door and was like, this isn't going well. And if you don't get involved, I'm really fearful that this project is not going to go according to plan. Mm-hmm. And so very quickly, I had to get involved literally in the weeds on ensuring that this system implementation went smoothly so that we could maintain SOX compliance when SOX was coming in a few months later. And so I had to get that learning really early on. And similar at IAC, at Ingram Micro, we also were underinvested in finance and had to spend a lot of time in what I call finance transformation at the time. So I was able to get a lot of firsthand knowledge about the technology. And what's going on today really is super important. I think it really has helped me in the current environment where technology innovation continues to accelerate so quickly. Very soon all companies are going to become technology companies because they really have to beef up their systems. Yeah. So my insight would be, don't delegate down all the technology work, really spend some time learning it. Again, you don't need to get in the weeds on it, but spending some time learning it will go a long way.
Yeah. So we've had a number of questions come up in the Q&A section. Some are about your personal leadership, and maybe we'll have time at the end to wrap back around to that. And then there's a question about how you manage success with the board of directors. But what I want to stay on this theme, if we can, just a little bit longer around digitalization and the role of CFO. Are there certain, and you're a very digital company yourselves, you have to sort of eat your own dog food, if you'll forgive the slightly ugly expression. Are there key metrics or reports that you look at every day as the CFO that are that matter to you beyond the usual things?
I mean, I think so. Yes. So we are a very metric driven company. Digitization right now is just on the forefront of everything. And we're super lucky to be so well positioned to be in the middle of that. But I think as CFO, I talked earlier about really being an advocate in greenlighting these projects, ensuring the teams have the freedom and the financial wherewithal to be able to innovate. I'm super focused on ROI for these investments. If you think about the importance of digital transformation and what it can drive, it's only going to be successful if you're able to measure the business outcomes and really hold those business partners accountable. It's becoming everyone's job, and that cross-functional alignment throughout the organization is really important. Building relationships cross-functionally enables a lot of work to be done. And one of the reasons I really truly believe that I got the role that I have is that I spent a lot of time in my career making sure that I built those relationships up, because digital transformation, the clear path to ensuring that you're not going to have a success is thinking that it's one person's job, the CIO. It's really a cross-functional collaboration, because it touches every single part. If you're really trying to break down those silos and drive efficiency throughout the organization, that's really the only way to do it.
Yeah. Huh. Maybe you could say a little bit about the biggest roadblocks maybe that you've had, or that you notice your customers having when it comes to digitalization and leveraging these more digital workflows. What gets in their way? It sounds so great, and we've talked maybe about one, which is they let it be the CIO's job only. But what are the other things that you notice?
Yeah, I think it's really important that organizations don't operate in silos and individually, right? And so digital transformation is not going to work if you're doing pieces of it in different parts of the organization and not bringing it together. I think it's what's happened a lot in the past few years, where the businesses have really been driving their own little digital transformation in their pockets. And then you have tons of systems that don't talk to each other and they don't align with each other. And so then you're spending a ton of money to maintain these separate, disparate systems. It's where ServiceNow comes in really strongly, because as we're thinking about getting a seamless experience for employees and customers, if you can have a layer that sits on top of these disparate systems, we call it the cross-functional platform that really can serve the whole organization. It means that you don't have to rip out these expensive systems that you've put in place, and you can just kind of build these seamless, easy experience workflows on top of it that can combine all of the systems. And so it's the silos that I think are really where you need to break down to drive the best innovations that you can.
Yeah. And so let me come back to the question about the board of governor, the board, and the people have been asking about that. And I know that you've mentioned a couple of times working with the other C-suite executives, trying to deal with some of these silos. Can you say a little bit about how CFOs can work more effectively with both boards and the other people in the C-suite?
Absolutely. So it's interesting. I've worked at a few different companies, and the engagement level with the board is not always. And so I'll talk specifically about ServiceNow because it's my newest role. I've only been there for less than a year, and it has an incredibly talented and incredibly engaged board of directors, which is actually fantastic. And so it's really about building relationships. It's bringing them in and keeping them involved, and they're there for a reason. And a lot of them have very particular expertise, right? And so if you can lean in and utilize that expertise, it really helps foster such a strong relationship. And again, I talked earlier about building relationships cross-functionally within the C-suite, but also with the board. It really helps, because then you're not just presenting to them once a quarter, surprising news. I've worked with many audit committee chairs, and almost all of them, their philosophy is no surprises, right? So it's about a lot of open communication. It doesn't mean I'm on the phone with them every week, but giving them updates as to what's going on, making sure that there's no big surprises, I think is key. And you're really able to gain a lot of credibility if you're able to maintain that with them.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like you spend a lot of time on these sort of softer things. It's not all just like letting the numbers communicate your point of view as if that was just obvious. They're the numbers. You're spending a lot of time translating the numbers, building value around the numbers. Am I right in thinking that?
You're 100% correct. I think the role of the CFO over the last 5 and 10 years has changed really dramatically, right? We're no longer the bean counters looking backwards and holders of the checkbook. We still do that, of course, but that's a very small part of the role. It's really about leadership. It's really about ensuring that you are strategically at the table when decisions are being made, really being able to understand what the growth drivers are of the business. For me, it's understanding the technology of the business. And this is my first my first job in software. And so as you can imagine, I spend a lot of time doing that. It's really about understanding, top to bottom, all of your stakeholders. And when I mean stakeholders, I start first always with the customer. And that's one of the things I love about ServiceNow. The company is so customer centric. Every conversation we have starts with what the customer needs and how we can help the customer. Then it goes to employees and shareholders. And so, I think that leaders today have to really shift their mindset to being much more than just reporting out the numbers.
You mentioned customers. Let's talk about that a little bit. And again, almost all companies are going to become technology companies, as you put it. What are you hearing from customers about the expectations they have, their perceptions of digital experiences? You must be learning a ton about what gets in their way, what their priorities are. Maybe you could just start off just sort of like, what's your sense of the landscape out there for customers?
Absolutely. So now more than ever, we're seeing customers really leaning into this digital transformation. It's super important for them to protect revenue, maintain business continuity, and really pursue productivity for their employees. Employees are dealing with so much right now, working from home, taking care of kids, elder care, just trying to, juggle so many balls. Really driving their productivity now is super important, as well as maintaining revenue growth. So we actually did some research with our partner, Wakefield Research, and they recently surveyed executives, employees in 11 countries across multiple industries to find out what's working, what isn't, what should stay, and what should go. The good news is that 91% of executives and 87% of employees say their company transitioned to the new remote world of working faster than they ever thought possible. And 87% of employees say these new ways of working are an improvement, right? So they're juggling a lot of stuff, but they're really enjoying the fact that they have more flexibility. They're not spending sometimes an hour or 2 hours in a car or train or bus commuting. So they really think that some of the new way of working is going to stay. But the survey also found that many companies are at a disadvantage because customers who are further along in the digital transformation, the ability for the employees to be productive while remote, the ability for their salespeople to close deals in a remote environment, that is not where it needs to be. And what it basically has done is that the ones that were further along in the digital transformation journeys are better equipped to move forward in the post-pandemic world. Yeah. And so what we're seeing is just continued evolution of customers really focusing not only on the customer experience today, but 360 on the employee experience as well, because a valued and an engaged employee is going to always drive more customer and better customer engagement as well. Yeah. So that's really what we're seeing in our customers right now.
I was hoping you could give a couple of examples about this because you talked about customers and employees. And we've got some questions in the chat about where might people start, or what cross-functional things that employees engage with could really benefit from digitalization. So maybe it's a couple of examples of where it's just like the ROI is just obvious. If someone was starting out today, where might they begin on some of in either the customer experience or the employee experience? But maybe start with let me just sort of decide for you, if you forgive me. Start with employees if you can. What would someone be doing first?
Yeah, I mean, so I mentioned it earlier that we've onboarded about 2,500 people in the remote environment, and that would have been absolutely impossible if not for our onboarding system, right? And when I talk about digital transformation, we are always customer zero for everything that we put out. So all the products that we're selling is what we're using internally to really help drive this digitization. As Bill likes to say, we drink our own champagne here. And so if you think about onboarding all of those employees, right? I onboarded a chief of staff, I onboarded an assistant, I onboarded a bunch of people myself who will tell you that the experience was second to none, right? They ordered their laptop, they ordered their equipment, they were able to do everything. They were able to submit all of their HR paperwork all remotely. So this is just one example. If you think about having, one employee portal where you can get information, policies, you can request something, whether you need it from HR, whether you need it from IT, whether you have an issue with your laptop, if you need new hardware being sent to your home now in a remote environment, if you have a question, an IT question, right? That you used to be able to walk down the hall to Jimmy because he was right there, that now everything is online. So these are very simple examples of workflows that go cross-functionally, that if you have one system, one portal where your employees can go. And by the way, people are looking for ease of doing business. How can I just do this really quickly and then get on with my job in this world where productivity is king? And so those are a couple of examples.
Mm-hmm. And for customers, is it just their buying experience when you're thinking about improving workflows for them? What are some examples there of things that tend to yield more loyalty or people buying more, however you all think about it?
Yeah, if you think about customer service, right? A good example. So we have an incredible media company, streaming service, that we're the backbone of their customer service, right? They very quickly went and grew their subscriber base in the pandemic, as you can imagine. And if you think about the fact that customers can go to one portal if they're having any issue with respect to the movie's not playing right, or I want to upgrade to premium because I want to get that special movie today. To be able to just do that right online in one portal, I mean, seamless experience. And in this day and age, that's what all companies are looking for: the seamless experience from a customer perspective as well as employee.
Mm-hmm. How can you increase if you're working from an organization that doesn't quite get this, any advice you have about how they can get digital transformation a higher priority, how that can sort of go to the top of the heap? We can deal with some of these legacy systems. Any advice about that?
Yeah, listen, I know that it's really hard in the wake of a pandemic to think, so far into the future, right? But if you're delaying these digital transformation efforts, organizations are just going to amplify the disruption caused by the pandemic, because if they're slower to transform, they're really going to only prolong the disruption. Digital transformation initiatives are the most effective way for organizations to bounce back. Creating these agile systems really are going to mitigate further disruption or any potential future disruption, right? Because let's face it, if we all think that this was one pandemic, one and done, and everything's just going to go back to the way it was before, I think I think we're missing the boat and not managing risk appropriately. And so prioritizing these initiatives really sets businesses up for success. And so my advice is don't drag your feet. I know it's not easy to find the dollars during this time, but it's really going to be in the company's best interest to invest, making sure that you're going to get the right ROI. Don't just throw money away, and this is why it's super important to be in the details here. But I think at the end of the day, really, this pandemic has turned resiliency into a business imperative across all industries. And one final thought I would just say is that it can be really hard to think long-term in the midst of this pandemic, but I would say that it's the CFO's role and the role of finance to really help drive that conversation and push it in the right direction.
Cool. I talked to so many company executives who basically try to digitize everything, and you're saying somehow we got to figure out where the leverage is, where there's ROI. We don't need to digitize everything. We need to digitize the important things.
Well, certainly, if you're getting started, right, you need to also take it in chunks. And to think you're going to do everything at once means you get nothing done, right? And so you got to take it step by step. Have a roadmap, right? And you just chink off the low-hanging fruit first, and the stuff that's going to get you the best ROI. Because once you show that ROI, everyone just wants to keep doing it. And so as a CFO, you'll get a lot of credibility if you get the quick wins and the ROI fast.
Cool. All right, just a couple of minutes left. And so far you talked about the need for empathy, which most CFOs I don't hear talking about it that way, and working on yourself to a certain degree. And you've talked about the evolving role of the CFO to look in on technology and become engaged in it, and thinking about the getting closer to customers and employees and their digital experience too. Any final words of benediction or a summary, something you haven't had a chance to say yet? Just going to do an open mic there.
I really appreciate the time. I really appreciate all the viewers coming to listen. I just think that right now, leadership is so important in this time. And to the point, Court, that you said earlier, it's not just about reporting on the numbers. It's not just about managing risk. It is about all of that and more. And how can we lead our teams through this pandemic and get them all on the other side? I think that's really what's going to establish the difference between a good leader and a great leader.
Cool. Thank you so much, Gina. It's been a pleasure talking with you just for a little while. Wish we could do it longer. I'm going to put a bow on this, and I see a lot of people saying thank you, and that was useful and helpful. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Court. I really appreciate being here.
Great. Thanks for joining us. You're welcome. And we're going to invite Steve Schoch to come up, and we'll transition to a different conversation.
All right. I'm here.
Steve, there you are. Welcome. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you. Good to see you.
Everybody, this is Steve Schoch. He is the CFO of 23andMe, which is an interesting biotech and genomics company. This is one of the fastest changing sectors. The clock speed in the sector is just amazing. So I'm really excited to talk with Steve today. What we're going to do is we're going to have a slightly different arc for this conversation because he came into a new role relatively recently with 23andMe, as did Gina. So I'm going to ask him to start off talking a little bit about what he noticed when he first joined 23andMe, and then talk about, again, the role, but in this case, the role of scaling up a firm like 23andMe. And then how to fund the unusual growth opportunities that 23andMe has. They have two very different businesses that Steve will probably talk about. How do you fund businesses that are have two very different dynamics to them? So I'm super delighted to welcome Steve. One little personal point of contact: Steve and I went to business school together, and it's just amazing to me that here we are meeting some number. The precise number doesn't really matter that much, but some number.
We won't share that.
So I'm doubly glad to welcome Steve into this conversation today. So Steve,
Super great to be here.
over to you. What stood out to you when you first came into your role, when you came into your role at 23andMe?
Yeah, no, it was like other places that I had been, and you know, it's a company who, you know, like an awkward teenager, right? It had just outgrown, you know, its ability to, you know, kind of function properly as a business. The market opportunity, the booming period of customer acquisition in the personal genetics service, which has a physical aspect to it in terms of a supply chain and customer, you know, customer facing marketing activities and transaction processing and all sorts of things. It had just gotten overrun. You know, really kind of increased by a factor of 10 in a year. And so it really was not able to carry on the way it has. It was failing from an infrastructure point of view. So, you know, a lot of it was kind of taking stock of what existed in the way of, you know, kind of how they were, you know, conducting their business, how their systems were set up. And, you know, I listened to Gina talk a little bit about, you know, the systems aspect of CFO jobs. And, you know, what I sort of find in these conditions, and then the job I had before that was really a build it from scratch kind of version of this, but you have to take a minute and you have to kind of take stock of kind of your data circulatory system, right? Because you're never going to get to a point where you're properly capturing your performance so you can plan and analyze and plan your performance to improve. And you know, certainly with 23andMe, it was really a matter of kind of sitting in a room with members of teams from various parts of the business, whether it's customer transaction data or it's, you know, supply chain data or other aspects of the business, and kind of literally building a vision of what the circulatory system was at that point and what it needed to be, right? And I've been at the company now, you know, 2 3/4 years, and it's really just now that we're kind of getting to that point where all of that data circulatory system is working right. Because, you know, as I mentioned to you when we were talking about you know, this discussion today, you know, I walked into the first board meeting after 3 weeks on the job and understanding where we were at on the, you know, kind of having a visual of where our performance was. And I said to the board, you know, showed them a couple of slides that my team had stuffed into the presentation with, you know, kind of the latest financials. And I said, I don't trust these numbers, nor should you. Wow. And it's going to take us some time to get to a point where we can trust the actual, you know, financial numbers that that we bring to this table. And in the meantime, I'm going to transition you to 100% cash and economics kind of guidelines as we run the business. And you know, we moved away from accounting numbers because we just couldn't trust, you know, what was coming out of the system, because the data circulatory system was really not functioning. And so, you know, sometimes you have to, as a, you know, and it's really all CEOs, you know, CFOs, one of their duties, I feel, is you know, kind of the honesty broker when they don't feel good about having a thumb on the performance of the business. And you know, I sort of felt like as a newcomer, I could do that, you know, in a kind of unbiased way, to, you know, just say it's going to be a while before we can get there. But in the meantime, cash is always king. Right. And, you know, that's watching things on a cash basis and reporting to them on a cash basis was a way to make sure that we were in control. Yeah.
So that's how you earned the right for that. But you mentioned that you're just now 2 3/4 years later. I can't imagine you said, give me 2 3/4 years to get this right. That would not have flown, I don't think. But somehow
No, but I think in the meantime, they felt pretty good because we began to focus on the cash economics of the business. And so while we were fixing the data infrastructure and the books and all of those things, we were able to start drilling down on unit economics. And, it's simple to kind of say to them, hey, after having that first conversation about don't trust the books, now let me tell you, the next thing is you're selling a lot of units that you're losing money on at the increment, right? That every time you sell one, you lose more money, right? So that's not a long-term winning strategy. So we have to change our pricing and promotional approaches to some of this business and which products we're focusing on and all of that. And I think, starting to show that we were stemming the tide on the cash burn of the company at the time. Cash doesn't lie, right? There's a bank account and there's a balance, and cash doesn't lie. It's the one, biggest truth serum of any company. And they could see us starting to turn the tide on how cash was going at the company. And so it did buy us time to get the books fixed. But look, I think having an honest relationship with your board is one of the most important, aspects of the job. Is they look to you as the CFO a little bit independently in many cases from the CEO, in that they do expect honesty, they do expect transparency and insight. That's sort of independent, and so I think it's a good thing for CFOs to strive for, is to have that kind of relationship with key board members.
A little bit more on this sort of the situation you started out with. You mentioned inheriting this sort of the circulatory system that wasn't working right, but you also inherited people, a team, and here you are saying we got to transform this. This just is not acceptable. Any thoughts you have about how you engage with the team and manage their outlook, their mentality, their willingness to go along on this journey to changing things?
Yeah, no, I mean, you find at these kinds of companies that have gone through rapid transformation that in many cases the people doing the work, to me it kind of comes down to having a vision for what good looks like at scale, right, is kind of the key. And part of the assessment of the people that are in place is, do my controller, does my head of FP&A, do I feel like they have a vision for what good looks like at scale? And I would say quite often when you're going through rapid growth like this, and kind of orders of magnitude change in the scale and scope of the business, quite often they haven't, every day that they come to work is the biggest thing they've ever seen, right? And part of the benefit, that comes with just a lot of experience that, we talk about the amount of time we've been in business, is that you've had a time to see what good looks like. And so then the hard part is going to this staff and kind of saying, hey, look, I want to help you build a career so that at a point, exactly what good looks like in your discipline, and you can be that kind of person that can lead that. But in the meantime, you got to learn, you got to rotate through some jobs within your function, but I'm going to bring someone in that is experienced at this kind of scale with this kind of function, whether it's FP&A, whether it's the controllership or some of the key accounting roles, or whatever function it is. And that's a delicate task, to keep people engaged while essentially giving them a slightly smaller role and scope in the business, so that they can kind of master that in their way to getting to the bigger jobs. And we have a term we've used at the company over time, that's kind of letting go of your Legos is the term we use, to kind of saying, you used to do this entire job of, the head of accounting, but you're never going to be a controller until you go and master some of the subcomponents of the accounting role, get you on that pathway to building a proper base. And it's hard for people to let go of doing that bigger job that they're not really now qualified to do. It's a hard conversation.
Yeah, I imagine. Maybe we could transition a little bit to talking about the two businesses, as I understand it, that 23andMe is in, and because in some ways you have to be a different CFO, I think, for each business, but maybe not. But I want to move into the conversation about the role of the CFO, and for you, go ahead.
Yeah, no doubt. And this particular company, I think, was a tough job to fill, because there are two basic, well, there's really three revenue earning businesses. There's the personal genetics service. We have now a huge database of genetics and other medical data on 12 million people, that itself actually produces revenue directly in terms of research services. And then we have this biotechnology business is really built on the insights coming out of that database that give us new insights on disease causality from a genetics point of view, and giving rise to a biotechnology segment. So a CFO, one of the things that a CFO has to do well, I think, is you have to get under the hood of the drivers of economics, the levers of economics of any business. And, I take the two extremes in our case, right? We have a consumer facing business that is every day, every minute, we're selling genetic services to people. And we are delivering them the kit that's necessary for them to spit in the tube and send into our lab, and we read the results and we send them reports. And that is an every day, every minute that's going on, and it has seasonality to it. It has, we have to make decisions on when to promote, how to price, marketing spend, and ultimately you have to look at lifetime customer value in a business like this to kind of say, do I have a business that's got long-term economic legs? And if it doesn't, what do I need to do to change it?
Yeah.
So that's a really minute-to-minute business, very dynamic, and that sort of thing. Now, I go over to the biotechnology side. The biotechnology side sounds dreadful on the surface. You say, okay, I'm going to put an investment in today. I'm going to start investing in a program today, and I'll generally expect to not start getting revenue from that investment for 10 years. And I have about a slightly less than 10% historic hit rate in terms of actually getting it all the way to the finish line and producing revenue. It's a very portfolio driven business. You got to take a lot of swings at that. And you're just putting money into it on an expanding basis as you go through time to get to revenue. Mm-hmm. It is a business that creates profound value when you find when you meet a medical need that has not been met, or you meet it better than the current thing that meets it, the value uptick is profound. I spent 10 years at Amgen seeing that business at scale and running finance for all parts of the organization at scale. And so my expectations coming into it were, of course, that's what that business is about. And it means that you've got to be girded to be raising capital until the first program hits revenue, which will be several years. So it'll be a deficit funding, kind of program. But over on the other side, the market expects us, investors expect us to get that genetic services business to profitability. So literally inside the company, when I came in, the conversation was, what do we need to do? Because in the world today, if a company like this is going to access the public markets, one of the things that you can say for sure is that the market will allow you to have hyper growth and not be profitable, or it will allow you to have modest growth but be profitable. But it will not allow you to be modest growth and not profitable. Right. Just won't allow that. Right. And so as could foresee this business kind of stabilizing in its growth, I just kind of said to everybody, we have to drive this to profitability, and it starts with unit economics. and lifetime value and kind of the basic building blocks of the economics of that business. And so I have a group that probably represents at the company 80% of the population of the employees of the company that are associated with the consumer business, where I'm saying we got to keep costs tight. We got to really drill down on the unit economics. We got to be really smart about our marketing spend and those sorts of things. And then over here on the biotech business, I'm saying, how can I get you more money to make more bets so that we can, enjoy the long-term value building that will come with that. And so a total tale of two cities that have to exist together in the orchestration of the business. And they are very well, when I started at Amgen, and that was my first foray into biotechnology. I must admit, I bought some molecular biology textbooks and some other things, and I attended a biotech for business week-long thing at Fuqua at Duke, and did all sorts of things to kind of get myself up the curve. And so sometimes you got to spend the extra time to learn just enough to understand, kind of the drivers of what people are coming to your door wanting to invest in. And so, yeah, it was not my undergrad.
Right.
Although I was an engineer undergrad, and so my brain is wired to know how something works, and so I do feel compelled to pursue things until I feel like I know how they work.
Yeah. You mentioned lifetime value of a customer, Steve, for the business, minute to minute business. And that's one of the things that you all track to know whether you're throwing good money after bad, whether the unit economics need to be changed in some way. But you didn't mention any metrics for the other business. So what are you looking at there that says we're on the right track, we're doing the right things, we've got the capital allocated properly? Here.
Yeah.
Can you say some things about that?
Yeah, for sure. There's a bunch of things on the biotech side that you look for. So one of the things I learned early on, that the things that drive perception of valuation of a company are very different in very different businesses. But one of the things that happens in the biotech space in particular is that perception of value actually builds as you produce data on any given program. So if you're working on a particular molecular compound in a particular disease state and you start to put it into clinical trials, once those clinical trials read out some data that says you have something here that actually affects, if it's an oncology product, it shrinks the tumor, right? And you start to share that data with the outside world, you get immediate credit in your valuation for that. Because investors look and say, it's a phase 2, so they still got to do a phase 3 study, but it looks like this thing actually works. We already have established that it's safe from the phase 1 trial, and so they start to accrue value to you immediately, and that actually gives you more access to capital to kind of finish the job with those kinds of programs, because suddenly you're being granted a larger valuation, your cost of capital, comes down, as time goes on. And so that's one measure of success. The other that I look at is more of a kind of an overarching view of the portfolio of programs that's being built, because again, this is a business, and you and I've talked about this, like you sort of look at my background and say, gee, you've been in the Hollywood business, you've been in the biotech business. They actually both have this following characteristic. They are a portfolio investment business, in whether it's making films in Hollywood, making medicines in the biotech space. Individual projects have a low inherent cumulative probability of success over time. But they, as a portfolio, because periodically one makes it to the finish line, they are, the successful ones carry the whole portfolio. And so what I look for in terms of progress is a portfolio that's diverse, and is moving along at the right pace in terms of getting from, one phase to the next, and so it's a business that in the early stages just takes a lot of question asking to make sure that when you get to the decision nodes on each of those programs, that the people running the business can convince you that the data they hold about where you're at on each individual one suggests you should invest in the next phase.
Yeah.
And so I've been around it long enough to know how to ask the right questions about things like safety and tolerability and competitive products and the changing views about where this particular product will fit in the physician's treatment waterfall. And things change over time in the competitive market for each product, and you have to continually ask these questions to kind of say, should we take it to the next stage?
Yeah.
And keep investing.
Yeah. I'm super interested in that. I want to see if I can land this in a certain way that's different than what Gina was talking about, because she emphasized ROI for a lot of which digitalization projects to pick. And I think the difference in your business is that for some of the really stretchy, really sciencey sorts of things, you can't calculate an ROI that well. I mean, you can do it, but I mean, it's not going to be some other metrics. That's partly why I was curious about it.
Yeah, so there's a framework that's become pretty clear, lots of data over time in the biotech and pharmaceutical industry, which is a probability framework that
we got to phase two.
Several, yeah, it's called probability of technical and regulatory success. And as you go from inception through preclinical to clinical and into commercialization, there is a well understood kind of attrition rate that happens along that pathway. And so what we do when we're kind of looking at any individual program, because we do actually do an ROI and try to figure out whether we believe in it. Our physicians that work for us, they look at the current treatment regimen in that particular disease setting. They look at the thing we're developing and they say, what kind of product profile are we going to produce that makes that a superior treatment that will put it at the front of the line in terms of use by physicians. Target product profile. We apply current pricing in the marketplace for competitive products, and we create a future revenue profile based on the addressable patient base, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, we put together a whole, it's just a much longer horizon. It might be a 15-year, 18-year present value calculation, but it's based on what we know about the compound in the early days and what we think it can be positioned as. And then we apply that probability framework, that probabilitizes all of those cash flows on a discounted basis back to a present value. So we absolutely apply that, but the error of estimate, obviously, in those kinds of things is enormous on individual projects. And this is where it becomes, you have to make good individual decisions, but you're going to probably be wrong on every one of them, one direction or the other. And it is a a portfolio business, right? And you have to have a lot of good swings at bat, but you have to apply a lot of discipline to every single one of them. And so it's not much different than what Gina talked about. It's just much bigger error of the estimate. And
you have many more people involved. You're reminding me of another phrase that we hear a lot around MIT, which is all forecasts are wrong. In this case, forecasts of ROI on these kinds of products are all wrong to a certain degree, but many are useful if you do it the right way. And so,
no, you have to do it, and then you have to adjust it every time you get something new in the way of information. You have to, leave the old one and be flexible enough to, to change your view. And if your view says, well, we better stop investing in this, we got some new data, you have to be set up to make those decisions based on new information. But Yeah, no forecast is ever right.
Right.
We can all admit that.
They are useful. It's sort of a conundrum.
But they're super useful, yeah.
Yeah. Anything you want to say about helping the board understand not only the finances, which you talked about, but how do you bring people along on sort of these more uncertain journeys? That would be, and the regulators as well. I think you're involved in talking with them from time to time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, the board, you know, what I always say to people that you have to remember about a board and kind of putting yourself in the shoes of your audience is they come in 4 or 5 times a year, they have a meeting, and then they leave and they go and they're busy people and they're doing other things. And so one of the things that you have to take into account in that is, one, maybe try to create a little bit more of a continuum in between board meetings by communicating with them about what's going on, what's coming, and even, for me, I developed a process with a couple of them of just going and having a visit once in a while in between board meetings to say, here's what's going on. Because, and Gina talked about, with her audit committee discussion about never any surprises. That's really the case with the board. You never want to show up with a really surprising, fully baked cake and say, oh, here, I'm dumping this on the table right here, and it's very different than you thought. That should never happen. There should literally never be a surprise at a board meeting, ever. And so I take a lot of, I run the board meetings at this company. I ran them at the last one and the one before that. And so, I've started to, just develop a really strong view about, keeping them prized in a little bit more of a continuum, because when they show up 4 or 5 times a year, you almost have to remind them about yourself if you haven't kept them, up to date in between. And so making them effective, makes them feel good about you as a management team, that you're all part of the same team and you're trying to be respectful in helping them make better decisions. Mm-hmm. And yeah, the regulators, 23andMe learned long before I came along that when you're in a business that is new, is sort of leading edge, that the regulators have expressed an interest in, don't ignore them. Because what happened with 23andMe is that in 2013, this company started about 14 years ago, but in 2013, they got basically a shutdown letter from the FDA that basically said, you've got to stop selling your kits, your personal genetic service, because we think it's not legal for you to do it without our authority. And it took a couple of years to build a pathway for this product to be regulated as it's regulated under the diagnostics rules, the medical device rules, and so essentially they had to restart in 2015, and it nearly did the company in, because it cut off almost all their revenues. And they got right, and I think the lesson learned was, like, you got to listen. You can't just bore through, and even though you're a Silicon Valley company and a darling and whatnot, and you're doing something no one else is doing, the regulators, that you got to listen to them. You got to partner with them for sure.
There have been some questions in the Q&A, Steve. Let me see if I can summarize them. The surprise events do happen, though. And so how do you communicate it in a way that's not surprising? This is Steve Shaw's question here. Because there are always going to be things that don't go quite right, or
yeah, for sure,
happens, or something like that.
Yeah, so I mean, a couple of things are to, and again, they come back to managing, expectations the right way, and kind of foreseeing what the potential causes of variance will be, so that you don't kind of overpromise what's going to happen. You don't assume everything goes right? I mean, that's clearly one thing to make sure that you don't have a surprise that comes up. But I also think that as you got to have a good thumb on performance measurements, And I think Gina had talked about, or you'd ask her a question about kind of, sort of frequency of watching and performance and whatnot. And I do think that, again, it goes back to having an excellent data infrastructure that can produce the kind of performance data that you need to watch variances start to happen in small ways so that you can give everybody a heads up, hey, this is starting to erode. We're starting to see something go differently here, or it could be going better than you thought, and you have to do some things to, to get your supply chain ready in a different way, or whatever it is. But right, it's really incumbent upon CFOs to get themselves set up so that they completely have a thumb on all the key performance measures and they can understand the variances. And when I talked about that first board meeting and telling the board they couldn't trust numbers, part of the worry that I had, and I expressed it at the time, was I can't track performance right now. I in terms of the things that I would want to do to be able to give you a good, solid quarterly performance report with all the right variances and whatnot, because I just don't have the data. And that was the ultimate goal of getting the numbers fixed for me. It was not so much that I can produce a really nice looking set of financial statements. It's I can tell you what's going on and how we can improve ourselves and drive performance better. And I think just having that communicated again on a continuous basis with your CEO, leadership team, and your board is, every business should theoretically be able to do that with the right data, moving in the right ways through the company and into the ERP system.
Yeah. There's been a question about, can you share some thoughts about how you engage with other executive leaders? I mean, and what's interesting about your situation, Steve, I think the founder of 23andMe is still around, and you've got
yeah, she is. She's great.
With, deep expertise, who've been in their fields for as long as you've been in yours. Any thoughts?
Yes.
With people like that?
Yeah, for sure. Look, I think you come into a multifunctional leadership group, particularly one that's been around for a while and new. And I mean, a little bit, you have to earn your stripes. And what I found in the company, and again, it comes back to knowing what good looks like at scale. One of the advantages I had is that I'd been in, businesses with tens of billions of dollars of revenue, growing at double-digit rates, and so I'd seen growth at scale that dwarfed this thing, but I understood where we needed to get on kind of getting ourselves positioned to to run this company better, and so a little bit of it was just articulating that vision, like we're doing this. That is going to fail as we grow. So here is a different way to do it, and it's all things big and small. And I think you got to resist going into these kinds of situations and saying, "I've got the answers." I think you have to first of all, you have to stick the landing in your own function, because if you don't stick the landing in your own function, then having influence on other things, is going to be hard. But for me, I view the job of CFO is having a influence on almost every major decision in the company is part of the CFO job, whether it's in engineering or whether it's in marketing or in product or whatever. They all have an investment and money aspect to them and a return aspect to them, and so I think doing your own function well and then helping people understand how to make better decisions and why you have to apply certain discipline to all of these decisions, and then being part of the mastering of the company's ability to be in a bigger scale. Again, all of them for the most part haven't experienced that scale, and so I think you can step in and really play a leadership role across the board. And in my job, I've expanded to taking over operations in the company, just because again, it mostly getting good at that mostly has to do with evaluating data, performance data, and knowing where to, push and pull, and where to make changes in wholesale ways, and all of those things. And I think the aspirations of a CFO should certainly be to influence well beyond the walls of the finance function, and to really be a part of the fabric of all decision making, strategic and operational at the company, because you have the best view of what's going on. You have the very, very best view of what's going on.
Steve, I wish we could continue, because there's been a couple of great questions just at the very end in the chat about, you've got to straddle two very different cultures, but that'll have to be for another time.
We'll do it again sometime.
Doing this, I really appreciate it. I hope this has been useful to everyone out there. Any final words before we leave?
No, I think the CFO role to me is the most central role at a company, and you should be viewing yourself as expansively as you can. And I think, a lot of companies try to put a CFO in kind of an accounting FP&A kind of bucket, and go out there and be a part of decision making, because your opinion, grounded in what you know about performance, is actually a more informed opinion than almost anybody else at the company. And it's a role that should be and is expanding, I think, in most companies.
Cool. Thank you again, Steve. Terrific job.
Great. Thanks. Good to see everybody. Say hi to Boston for me, my old hometown.
All right.
See ya.
Talk to you all later.